just laws for the people now. Act now. March to Parliament.
On a warm July evening in 1888, a dense crowd of female workers stood in absolute silence before the massive gates of a London factory. Hundreds of women waited anxiously for a response from management, holding sheets of paper with their firm demands. The fate of entire neighbourhoods in London's East End hinged on the outcome of this silent standoff. This scene marked the culmination of a long historical process hidden from the eyes of London's high society. The hidden truth about these professions had been hushed up for decades to preserve the reputation of industrial magnates. What took place behind the closed doors of the huge brick buildings rarely made it into the pages of the morning newspapers. Working conditions there were so harsh that modern historians often refer to these workshops as zones of silent survival. Every decision to take such a job was a carefully calculated mathematical equation, with the family's well-being at stake. Women consciously chose this path, fully understanding all the risks involved for their future. In this episode, we'll reveal the details of the riskiest professions of the 19th century. You'll see the reality of working in match factories, in massive commercial laundries, and sorting coal at the mineshaft surfaces. We'll break down the numbers, wages, and fines that shaped the harsh economy of that time. Behind every historical fact lie the specific decisions of real people who tried to change the established system. You'll understand why resisting working conditions often required subtle diplomacy and incredible fortitude. Can you guess what lay hidden behind the snow-white colours and immaculate tablecloths of London's aristocracy? Victorian London of the 1870s prided itself on its status as the world's most advanced capital. Wealthy city dwellers enjoyed an unprecedented level of comfort in their spacious, multi-story mansions. However, this impeccable facade was sustained by the ceaseless labour of thousands of women invisible to society. The entire infrastructure of urban comfort relied on a vast network of commercial enterprises. Journalist Annie Besant was one of the first to draw attention to this hidden economy. She came from a wealthy family, but decided to devote her life to studying actual working conditions. Besant spent weeks in the eastern districts of the capital, gathering dry statistics and financial facts. Her reports were a true revelation to readers of respectable British newspapers. The journalist deliberately avoided emotion, preferring to rely on rigorous mathematical calculations and verified data. Besant's research showed that women formed the backbone of the workforce in the most arduous industries. There were virtually no alternative sources of income for women living in working-class neighbourhoods. Domestic servants were considered a privileged class, and not everyone who wanted to join it was accepted. The rest had to choose between factory work, laundry, and coal sorting. Each of these three jobs carried its own specific health risks. The workday in these sectors lasted between 14 and 16 hours. The legislation of the time provided little regulation regarding shift lengths for adult female workers. Factory owners independently set production quotas and multi-tiered systems of penalties. Any tardiness or defective work was punished by deducting a portion of their meagre wages. This harsh system forced women to work to the limits of human endurance. The economic model of London's East End was built on a constant influx of cheap labour. Thousands of migrants from the provinces joined the ranks of the capital's working class every day. Competition for any available job allowed employers to keep wages at a minimum. Women were paid 2 or 3 times less than men for the same work. This reality made women's labour the invisible foundation of the Industrial Revolution. Annie Besant meticulously documented all these financial disparities in her notebooks. She interviewed hundreds of female workers, determining the exact amounts of their weekly expenses. Rent for a tiny room ate up as much as half of their regular earnings. The remaining money was barely enough for the cheapest food and coal for heating. The journalist built a compelling body of evidence for future large-scale public debates. This analytical work required immense patience and phenomenal meticulousness. Besant had to overcome the mistrust of the workers themselves, who were accustomed to hiding their problems. Many feared being fired simply for talking to representatives of the official press. However, the journalist's calm and respectful tone gradually won over her interlocutors. The data she collected became the foundation for a large-scale campaign for social reform. The path to improving working conditions was just beginning, and serious challenges lay ahead. Society was not yet ready to recognize women's right to safe working conditions. We'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think about the role of journalism in changing the laws of the Victorian era? Share your thoughts in the comments. What lay behind the heavy oak doors of London's massive commercial laundries? These establishments resembled veritable industrial factories dedicated to producing cleanliness. Inside, there was always thick steam, which reduced visibility to just 3 meters. The temperature in the ironing rooms often exceeded 35 degrees Celsius. It was under these conditions that thousands of women toiled, providing the vast city with fresh linens. The profession of laundress was considered one of the most grueling in the 19th century. Women stood at enormous wooden tubs for 14 hours straight. They had to constantly heat water on massive coal stoves. The thick, alkaline solution severely dried out their skin, causing chronic irritation. Heavy, damp sheets required immense physical effort as they were constantly wrung out by hand. There was no room for improvisation here. Each worker knew her specific task. Sorters separated delicate, expensive fabrics from coarse broadcloth. Washers handled the main cleaning process in boiling soapy water. Ironers used heavy cast iron irons, heated over an open fire. Each stage of this process carried specific occupational health risks. The risks were linked not only to the temperatures, but also to the overwhelming general fatigue. The women's concentration would plummet by the end of a long work shift. Constant exposure to a damp environment was sure to lead to joint problems. Despite this, commercial laundries attracted many women from poor neighborhoods. Working there guaranteed an income that, while small, was absolutely stable. For many widows, the laundry was the only way to pay their rent. The math of their survival was harsh and left no room for financial mistakes. A laundress's weekly earnings amounted to about 8 shillings. This money was enough only for basic necessities, without the slightest culinary indulgence. Losing a job was tantamount to a real financial disaster for the entire family. Laundry owners were well aware of their absolute power over their employees. They imposed harsh fines for damaged clothing or even the slightest tardiness. Often, the fine exceeded the daily earnings of the woman at fault. Defending one's legal rights under such conditions was practically impossible. Any attempt to openly argue with management resulted in immediate dismissal. Many laundry workers tried to find safer jobs in factories, but industrial enterprises imposed their own strict requirements on their employees. Switching to another industry always meant losing their hard-earned experience and valuable connections. Therefore, most women remained in laundries for decades, resigning themselves to their fate. Their daily labor went completely unnoticed by residents of affluent neighborhoods. The life of a laundress was full of hardships, but it offered a certain degree of financial independence. These women made their own decisions and were responsible for their daily well-being. What the old archives of coal companies conceal will make you shudder. In the next chapter, you'll learn about the sacrifices made by women who decided to descend to the very depths of the earth for the sake of survival. In the country's northern coal mining regions, there was a completely unique profession for women. They were called surface workers, and they labored right at the mouths of the coal mines. These women performed the monotonous task of sorting the mined rock, separating clean coal from worthless stones. Their entire workday was spent in a thick, impenetrable cloud of coal dust. The sorting process required incredible physical endurance and exceptionally sharp eyesight. Huge mine cars loaded with rock were continuously unloaded onto metal sorting tables. With their bare hands, the women picked out pieces of waste rock from the fast-moving stream of coal. In winter, they worked in the biting wind, and in summer, they suffered under the scorching sun. Protective clothing was practically non-existent. Only thick aprons protected their everyday dresses. In 1886, this grueling profession was suddenly threatened with a ban. A group of politicians in the capital decided that working in a coal mine contradicted Victorian ideals of femininity. They drafted an official bill prohibiting the hiring of women for coal sorting. This bill could have instantly left thousands of families in the industrial counties without a means of livelihood. The situation demanded an immediate and resolute response from the women workers themselves. The surface workers refused to wait silently for a final decision on their fate. They organized an unprecedented diplomatic mission directly to the capital of the empire. A group of 50 coal sorters traveled to London to meet with high-ranking ministers. The women donned their finest formal attire to shatter stereotypes about their coarseness. It was an incredibly bold political move for working-class women of that era. During their meeting with officials, the workers demonstrated outstanding oratory skills. They did not beg for mercy, but logically argued their right to fair work. The women displayed their calloused hands, proving that they were capable of performing difficult physical labor. They cited precise figures for their daily earnings, demonstrating that the ban would lead them into inevitable poverty. Members of Parliament were genuinely impressed by the high level of organization and the arguments presented by this unusual delegation. This historic meeting vividly illustrated the vast divide between different segments of British society. Ministers, who had been passing laws from the comfort of their offices, were confronted with real life for the first time. They found themselves face to face with strong individuals capable of effectively defending their economic interests. The delegation of female sorters forced conservative politicians to reconsider their views on women's labour. Respect for these hard-working women began to grow gradually within British society. Many of these courageous women were the wives and sisters of miners who worked deep underground. Their families depended entirely on stable and continuous work at the coal mine. Working above ground at the mine toughened their character, but robbed them of even the slightest hope for an easy life. The women accepted this grim reality with remarkable stoicism and dignity. Their diplomatic victory in Parliament demonstrated the true power of organised resistance. But new, harsh trials lay ahead, dictated by the economy of survival. We will discuss exactly how the budgets of such working-class families were managed later on. Why did women voluntarily take jobs in coal yards, knowing the inevitable consequences? The answer lay in the harsh mathematics of daily survival for Britain's poorest families. Alternatives in the regional labour market were extremely limited and often less lucrative. Women made an entirely pragmatic choice between preserving their health and sheer starvation. A surface sorter's earnings amounted to about 10 shillings in a good work week. This was slightly more than what was consistently offered at London laundries or textile mills. In remote regions where coal mining remained the sole industry, there was no choice at all. Women often went to work in the same places where their fathers or husbands had toiled for decades. This created entire mining dynasties, forever tied to a single large enterprise. The household budget of a typical miner's family was planned with mathematical precision down to the penny. Money was allocated to pay for company housing and to buy bread, black tea, and inexpensive meat on Sundays. Any unforeseen household situation could instantly shatter this incredibly fragile financial balance. If the head of the household was injured, the entire burden of financial support fell on the woman. In such critical cases, working above ground at the mine became the only possible lifeline. The owners of the coal companies skillfully exploited this total dependence of the population. They built isolated workers' settlements where absolutely all the houses belonged to the corporation. Workers were forced to buy basic groceries at factory stores at exorbitant markups. This closed system kept people in a state of constant financial debt to their employer. Changing one's place of residence or job under such harsh conditions was nearly impossible. Women were well aware of their extreme vulnerability within this carefully designed economic trap. They tried to set aside tiny amounts of money in case of sudden illness or crisis. These secret savings were kept strictly hidden, even from their own relatives. Financial independence, however minimal, gave them an important sense of security. For the sake of this hidden sense of security, they were willing to endure the acrid coal dust and the biting cold. The social structure of coal mining towns was always built on a strict, unspoken hierarchy. Women who worked above ground deservedly enjoyed a certain respect among their neighbors. Their work was rightly considered a hard but exceptionally honest way to support their families. They formed strong bonds of mutual aid, helping one another through difficult times. This communal solidarity was incredibly helpful for surviving the harsh realities of industrial life. Despite the grueling conditions, the coal sorters always found reasons for joy in their daily lives. They sang folk songs while sorting coal to set a common rhythm for the monotonous work. On their rare days off, they would thoroughly wash away the coal dust and put on clean dresses. Their desire to preserve their human dignity proved far stronger than the industrial drudgery. Their ability to find inner beauty in simple things never failed to amaze outside observers. Leaving the coal mines marked the beginning of an entirely new phase in the history of women's labor. In the next chapter, you'll learn what lay behind the doors of the factories that produce light for the entire empire. In the 1880s, ordinary matches were a staple in every British home. London's match factories produced millions of boxes daily, supplying the entire country without interruption. The vast majority of workers at these massive commercial enterprises were young women. They toiled in gigantic production halls, filled around the clock with the pungent smell of chemicals. Sarah Chapman was one of those who reported to work every day at the famous Bryant and May factory. She stood out noticeably among the other workers for her incredibly sharp mind and analytical skills. Sarah was engaged in the monotonous task of packaging finished products, spending 14 hours a day on her feet. She observed the entire production process with exceptional attention to detail. Her natural powers of observation quickly helped her uncover the hidden mechanisms of the factory's strict management. White phosphorus, a cheap and extremely effective element, formed the basis of chemical production. Factory owners traditionally preferred it because of its low cost and remarkable ease of use. However, constant contact with this corrosive substance caused irreparable physical harm to the workers' health. The air in the workshops was literally thick with toxic chemical vapors from the phosphorus. No effective ventilation systems or protective masks were provided at the factory from the outset. The female workers ate their meals right at their workstations, as there was no separate break room. This repeatedly and inevitably increased the risks of chemical exposure to the human body. The factory management carefully concealed the actual statistics on serious occupational diseases among the staff. If a woman's health was irreversibly compromised, she was simply fired without the slightest severance pay. The factory owners found it astonishingly easy to recruit new replacements from among London's unemployed women. Every day, Sarah Chapman witnessed her colleagues leaving the factory one after another, never to be seen again. She tried to speak diplomatically with the foreman about the urgent need to improve conditions in the workshops. But the foreman merely cynically threatened her with immediate dismissal for violating work discipline. Management deliberately fostered an atmosphere of fear, suppressing absolutely any attempts at collective dissent. The factory was in many ways reminiscent of a closed system, where the women workers were powerless cogs in a machine. The system of financial fines at the match factory had been taken to the point of complete economic absurdity. Women were mercilessly fined for a crookedly affixed label, a brief conversation with a co-worker, or a dropped match. Sometimes, by the end of a grueling week, a worker would lose up to a third of her already meager earnings. This withheld money went directly into the company's profits, increasing the dividends of wealthy shareholders. The mathematics of corporate exploitation were flawlessly constructed and operated without a single glitch. At the very same time, journalist Annie Besant was searching for a high-impact story on women's labor. Rumors of the unbearably harsh conditions at match factories had finally reached her newsroom. She began actively seeking a reliable contact among the workers who were willing to speak the truth publicly. The historic meeting between Sarah Chapman and Annie Besant became an absolute turning point in this story. Two strong women combined their unique skills to achieve a common goal. The combination of Sarah's insider knowledge of the numbers and Annie's writing talent created a powerful social weapon. They began meticulously preparing a publication that was set to shake conservative Victorian society. A powerful media storm was brewing, one capable of changing labour laws forever. How exactly did the women manage their budget before these events began? Can you guess how much it cost to live as an ordinary match sorter in an industrial district of London? The budget of an East End factory worker was a true exercise in survival on the very edge of what was possible. The average weekly wage at a match factory rarely exceeded 5 shillings. From this meagre sum, she had to pay for a cramped corner in an overcrowded rented room. Rent for such housing consistently ate up 2 to 3 shillings a week. The remaining meagre funds were divided among food, cheap clothing, and unavoidable transportation costs. A worker's diet consisted mainly of stale bread, cheap margarine, and weak tea. Fresh meat or vegetables were an absolutely unaffordable luxury for the vast majority of women. Poor daily nutrition directly affected the body's ability to resist the toxic chemical environment. The vicious cycle of poverty and occupational diseases seemed utterly unbreakable and eternal. Sarah Chapman understood this cruel financial reality down to the finest detail. She saw how the factory owner's fines literally took away the women's last piece of bread. Every penny unlawfully withheld by the corporation meant a missed dinner for a weary worker. It was this cynical economic injustice that outraged Sarah more than anything else in the world. She sincerely believed that hard, honest work should ensure a person's basic survival. Shoes had always been a major expense, requiring months of grueling savings. Female factory workers constantly had to walk to work in absolutely any kind of London weather. Leaky old boots led to constant colds during the autumn slush. Buying a new, sturdy pair of shoes often meant having to literally go hungry for several days. These small, exhausting details of daily life painted a sweeping picture of hopeless poverty. Annie Besant studied these figures with undisguised horror during her lengthy interviews with the female workers. She mathematically compared the women's earnings with the colossal profits of the Bryant and May Company. Every year, the factory owners paid their wealthy shareholders enormous dividends, reaching as high as 20% annually. The journalist clearly saw a direct link between the owner's luxury and the workers' utter poverty. These economic facts became the solid foundation for her future scathing article. The women tried to set up their own mutual aid funds, saving a farthing a week. These tiny secret funds were used exclusively to support those who unexpectedly lost their jobs. However, during mass layoffs or seasonal epidemics, the funds would run dry at an alarming rate. The community's internal financial resources were critically insufficient to withstand systemic economic crises. Urgent government intervention was needed to regulate the complex relationships with greedy employers. Sarah Chapman effectively used her mathematical skills to secretly organize the women. She patiently helped them keep accurate records of deducted fines and overtime hours. Accurate, verified figures deprived factory management of the ability to cheat illiterate female workers with impunity. Knowing their legal rights and exact earnings became the first crucial step toward gaining independence. The women gradually began to realize their immense value in the empire's production chain. Poverty statistics rapidly became a powerful mathematical argument in the political struggle. In the next chapter, you'll learn what happened when this hidden truth finally came to light. Annie Besant's article, titled "White Slavery in London," was published in June 1888. The text had the effect of a bombshell in complacent Victorian society. Readers were utterly shocked by the precise figures cited for fines and the detailed description of working conditions. The impeccable reputation of the giant Bryant and May Company was instantly placed under serious threat. The factory owners were enraged by the unheard-of audacity of the journalist and her female employees. The company's management immediately attempted to salvage its tarnished image. They hastily drafted an official legal document that completely refuted all the facts presented in Besant's article. Foreman began methodically going from workshop to workshop, forcing the women to sign this document. The workers were directly threatened with immediate dismissal if they categorically refused to sign. An incredibly harsh psychological pressure was brought to bear on every single employee of the massive factory. It is at this tense moment that we return to that very scene from the beginning of our story. Thousands of determined women gathered in front of the factory gates, flatly refusing to sign the false retraction. Sarah Chapman and her closest allies stood fearlessly in the front ranks of this silent resistance. The air was incredibly charged with tension. The outcome of this standoff was completely unknown. The factory management, utterly at a loss, looked on at the united crowd of their formerly submissive employees. The factory owners made a fatal management mistake by firing one of the alleged ringleaders of the revolt. This blatantly unjust decision became the spark that ignited the dry tinder of pent-up discontent. Instead of being intimidated, the women walked off the job and left the factory floors en masse. Nearly 1,500 female workers left their dusty workplaces all at once. The massive factory, which produced millions of matches, came to a complete and irreversible halt within a few minutes. This spontaneous, large-scale protest demanded immediate, clear organization and competent leadership. Sarah Chapman boldly took on the enormous responsibility of coordinating the crowd's actions. She understood perfectly well that without a well-thought-out plan, the mass strike would quickly collapse due to hunger. The women quickly formed a strike committee, which included the most respected and level-headed workers. An emergency fundraising drive began to support the strikers and provide them with basic food. Annie Besant actively and energetically joined in organizing a solidarity campaign for the female workers. She masterfully used her strong connections in the press to prevent the factory owners from sweeping the conflict under the rug. The journalist urged wealthy Londoners to urgently donate money to the Women's Strike Fund. Newspapers published daily, detailed reports on the progress of the historic standoff in the East End. Public opinion clearly and unequivocally sided with the oppressed factory women. Factory management desperately tried to hire strikebreakers to quickly restart production, but local women categorically refused to take the strikers' places, even under the threat of dire poverty. The solidarity shown in the harsh East End proved to be completely unprecedented for that historical period. Time was relentlessly working against the massive Bryant and May Company, which was losing colossal profits. Competitors began rapidly pushing their products off the shelves of prestigious London stores. Shareholders demanded that the directors immediately resolve this conflict, which had suddenly dragged on. The pressure on the factory owners grew steadily with each new day of forced downtime. However, their excessive corporate pride prevented them from entering into direct negotiations with the ordinary workers. Preparations for the march required ironclad internal discipline and impeccable visual order. The women carefully cleaned their finest dresses and hats for this extremely important event. They intended to clearly demonstrate that they were worthy and respected citizens of their vast country. The march was meant to be a peaceful demonstration of the working class's strength and self-respect. A long, grueling journey lay ahead of them to the historic walls of the Palace of Westminster. On a July morning in 1888, a procession of hundreds of women set out resolutely on their journey. They marched from the gloomy brick walls of the match factory toward the glittering, opulent centre of London. The march proceeded in absolute and striking silence, without aggressive political slogans or disturbances. Wealthy city dwellers watched this disciplined and solemn procession with great astonishment. London had never before witnessed such organisation among ordinary factory workers. Sarah Chapman walked continuously at the head of the column, confidently guiding the movement of her comrades. She felt a tremendous personal responsibility for the safety of every woman in this imposing crowd. The police vigilantly escorted the march, but found no cause for forceful intervention. The strikers' exemplary discipline completely shattered stereotypes about the working class's uncontrollable aggression. It was an exceptionally peaceful mass demonstration of their self-respect and legitimate economic rights. A delegation of 50 female workers, including Sarah herself, was officially admitted to Parliament. They met with a group of highly influential lawmakers who were prepared to listen carefully to their demands. The women behaved with absolute composure, citing precise figures and facts they had prepared in advance. They described in detail the system of fines, the catastrophically low wages, and the dangerous working conditions. The politicians were deeply impressed by the mathematical precision of their arguments and their profound understanding of economics. The parliamentary hearings became an incredibly public humiliation for the greedy owners of the match factory. The lawmakers categorically demanded that Bryant and May provide explanations for each point of the allegations. Pressure from political circles instantly compounded the widespread public condemnation of the factory owners. The company's reputational damage was truly catastrophic and threatened complete financial ruin. The directors of the massive factory were forced to reluctantly agree to participate in official conciliation negotiations. The negotiations took place in a tense atmosphere, mediated by a completely independent arbitration board in London. Sarah Chapman and Annie Besant firmly represented the interests of the striking women at the table. They categorically refused to make even the slightest compromise on the key points of their demands. Their main and non-negotiable conditions were the cancellation of all fines and the reinstatement of the dismissed workers. They also firmly demanded the creation of a separate, safe dining area outside the toxic workshops. The management of the powerful company desperately tried to bargain, offering only minor, partial concessions. But the workers' delegation stood its ground, fully aware of the strength of its current economic position. The strike fund was full, and the women could confidently continue the strike for several more weeks. The factory owners finally realized that their initial strategy of intimidation had completely failed. Tensions at the official negotiating table quickly reached a fever pitch. In the end, factory directors Bryant and May were forced to capitulate completely. They officially and publicly accepted all of the strike committee's demands, without exception. The system of extortionate corporate fines was completely abolished by personal order of top management. All the women who had been fired during the conflict were immediately reinstated to their jobs. It was a complete and unconditional legal victory for ordinary British factory workers. The success of the strike at the match factory greatly inspired workers in other industries. A powerful wave of unionisation swept across Victorian England. This triumph was only the very first decisive step on the long historical path toward justice. How did this victory influence workplace safety going forward? The answer to this question lies in the long-term consequences of the historical decisions made. The striking women's resounding victory forced the government to pay close attention to economic working conditions. Inspectors began visiting factories with the utmost regularity, strictly enforcing compliance with health and safety standards. Owners of other factories voluntarily waived fines, fearing in panic that the London scenario might be repeated. The women finally realized that organizing into unions gave them real legal protection. Sarah Chapman became one of the most influential leaders of the country's first women's union. She continued to work at the factory, but now officially represented the interests of the entire large workforce. Her vast experience in negotiation helped resolve minor workplace conflicts before they escalated. The union regularly collected dues, building a reliable financial fund to provide legal support for the women workers. The country's labour relations system was becoming increasingly civilized and transparent. However, the most significant underlying problem in match production remained completely unresolved. White phosphorus was still actively used in the workshops, continuing to damage people's health on a daily basis. Factory management formally agreed to improve meal conditions, but did not abandon the toxic substance. Replacing the poisonous phosphorus with safe alternatives required extremely significant financial investments in modernization. The capitalists were in no hurry whatsoever to give up their super profits for the sake of the production staff's safety. A completely new phase of the long struggle began, this time for a total ban on dangerous technologies. Annie Besant continued to fearlessly publish articles about alternative, safe methods of match production. She cited European countries as a striking example, where white phosphorus was already strictly prohibited by law. The journalist strongly urged the British Parliament to follow this exceptionally progressive example. Enormous public pressure on the chemical industry began to grow gradually but steadily. Sarah Chapman played an exceptionally active role in the large-scale collection of data for this new campaign. She regularly provided Besant with accurate information about new cases of serious occupational diseases. The union independently organized several exhibitions showcasing safe, high-quality matches from Sweden. These clearly demonstrated to British consumers that high-quality products could be manufactured without risking lives. Consumers began to boycott en masse the products of factories that stubbornly clung to outdated, toxic technologies. This mass economic boycott proved far more effective than any theoretical political debate. The sharp drop in sales forced company owners to seriously consider urgently modernizing their production facilities. Fearing another crisis, Bryant and May began urgently testing safer formulas. This technological transition period was long and accompanied by numerous production difficulties, but the historical trajectory of the industry's development was set once and for all, with no turning back. By the end of the 19th century, toxic white phosphorus had been completely phased out of British manufacturing. The law officially and strictly prohibited the use of this extremely dangerous substance in the chemical industry. The vast factories became safe, and the stuffy air was cleansed of toxic, destructive fumes. It was a monumental economic victory of common sense over the thirst for quick corporate profit. Ordinary female factory workers made an enormous personal contribution to this process. Sarah Chapman's journey brilliantly demonstrated how a single act of courage can set off a historic chain reaction. From an ordinary packer, she rose phenomenally to become an incredibly influential labor leader. Her actions have forever and deservedly inscribed her name in the annals of the British labor movement. The legacy of these important events continues to shape the fundamental principles of modern labor law. In the next chapter, we will summarize this incredible historical process. The history of Victorian women workers is not merely a chronicle of the hardest, most grueling labor. It is a sweeping narrative of the formation of a collective civic consciousness amid the most challenging economic conditions. The women who toiled daily in laundries, mines, and factories laid a solid foundation for modern labor law. Their daily struggle for survival was truly a quiet feat, one that went unrecognized by official state honors. They proved that true human dignity does not depend on social status or income. Sarah Chapman, who began her journey as a humble sorter, became an absolute symbol of resistance. She never sought political fame. She was driven solely by a keen sense of justice. Her unique ability to unite people helped transform a disparate crowd into a disciplined political force. Sarah clearly demonstrated that skillful negotiations are always more effective than spontaneous and destructive popular uprisings. Her diplomatic talent saved many thousands of factory women from poverty and constant humiliation. Journalist Annie Besant also brilliantly fulfilled her crucial historical mission right to the very end. She masterfully harnessed the power of the printed word to provide legal protection for the most vulnerable segments of British society. Her scathing articles broke through the wall of indifference erected by the well-fed, conservative Victorian middle class. The successful collaboration between Besant and Chapman became a perfect example of an alliance between the intelligentsia and factory workers. Together, they managed, in a phenomenal way, to radically change the laws of the most powerful empire. The victory at the match factory served as a powerful catalyst for truly global social change. Young labor unions rapidly transformed into an influential political force that corporations had to reckon with. Employers finally realized that workplace safety is a mandatory and non-negotiable condition for business stability. The Industrial Revolution began to slowly take on a human face thanks to these hidden economic conflicts. The economy gradually learned to strike a proper balance between corporate profits and the basic well-being of people. The ban on toxic white phosphorus saved the lives of tens of thousands of female factory workers around the world. This historic precedent demonstrated that the state is fully capable of regulating the use of hazardous technologies. Many European countries soon eagerly adopted the British model, radically reforming their laws. Industrial safety became a key subject of international treaties and agreements. The entire industrial world took an incredibly important step toward protecting the health of the working population. Today, the huge old brick buildings of Victorian factories have been transformed into trendy London offices. The industrial East End is no longer associated with abject poverty and grueling women's labour. However, the walls of these restored buildings still hold the memory of the events of the 1880s. Our modern standard of everyday comfort is built on a solid foundation laid by those nameless female workers. We simply must remember the enormous price they paid for our current well-being. Every lit match produced, every clean white shirt had its own economic significance in those days. Women took on the most dangerous work solely out of a deep devotion to their families. The culmination of Sarah Chapman's journey is a magnificent triumph of will over harsh circumstances. She not only brilliantly defended her rights, but also saved future generations from toxic factories. Her remarkable story teaches us that any systemic change always begins with the initiative of a single person. One must never underestimate the immense power of solidarity in the long struggle for basic rights. The legacy of the massive Match Girls strike forever changed the social contract in British society. The events in the East End became the main starting point for creating truly fair working conditions. The long and difficult journey from complete powerlessness to legal protection was achieved thanks to the immense courage of these people. Their undeservedly forgotten names should stand alongside those of the greatest statesmen. This historic epic culminated in a resounding victory that radically transformed the very essence of industrial relations. Now we know for certain who actually paid for Victorian prosperity. Sarah Chapman successfully completed her unique journey, transforming herself from a completely powerless packer in a toxic factory into the architect of new labour laws that protected the lives of thousands of women. Her resounding victory proved that even under the harshest economic conditions, unwavering human dignity and solidarity can break the resistance of corporations. The story of Victorian laundresses, female miners, and fearless matchmakers is a vivid historical example of how a desperate struggle for basic survival can transform global industry. What other hidden historical professions or unjustly forgotten stories would you like us to explore in detail in our next videos? Be sure to suggest new topics in the comments and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our brand new in-depth documentary investigations.